Hi, my name is Margaret Tucker, and yeah, as mentioned, I'm a policy manager at GitHub. And what that means is a lot of my job involves talking to policymakers who want to pass legislation on platforms or AI or just generally tech in general. And explaining why they should consider the needs of software developer platforms, code collaboration, open source development. And so I will say that, I don't think I need to explain to all of you the reasons why open source and software development are important. But I will explain how we kind of approach content moderation on our platform, and both how code informs our approach to code as content informs our approach to content moderation, and also how the developer community, its nuances, norms, expectations inform how we govern our platform. All right, so let's get started. So first off, if you take anything away from this talk, it's noting that code is very different from other content. So when I say content, I'm talking about things that people share on the internet. So GitHub is a user-generated content platform, and typically when you hear that, you think of photo, video, microblogging, things like that. But code text is also content. It's also, code is considered speech, code is considered text, but it functions very differently from other forms of text. And a big thing about code is that it has a functional purpose, and that creates really unique considerations for platform moderation. And so I'll kind of go through all of these, but the general flow would be talking about copyright considerations, dual use, mainly about security research, and then also the network effects of takedowns because code is in use and functional purposes. All right, so first off, the functional purpose of code often leads to independent duplication. Code is essentially instructions to make a computer perform a function, and just as there are only so many ways to fry an egg, there are oftentimes only so many ways to make a computer perform a specific function. And so code shared on open source developer platforms like GitHub have very different approaches to licensing and sharing than other content. So oftentimes copyright disputes on sites like GitHub are not about using a developer's code, but about meeting specific requirements under terms of relevant licenses, and can often be resolved between developers without our intervention. And so thinking about this and thinking about policymakers who want to legislate on copyright infringement, when code is swept under that can be a really big issue for quite a few reasons. So once again, the functional purpose of code, there's only so many ways to do something. And that's why, recipes also aren't copyrightable because, there's only so many ways to get to a certain point. So you can kind of think about software code in a certain way as a recipe. And then also the element of independent duplication does mean that there's just, a lot of false positives. So if you were to subject a code collaboration platform to the same type of scanning for copyright infringement, it would just create a lot of issues. So advocating for these unique copyright considerations was put to the test in 2018. So the EU first introduced the Copyright Directive, and it was trying to deal with copyright issues online, and would have required platforms to implement content upload filters to prevent copyright infringement. And so these proposed requirements raised significant concern within the software developer community because of the high likelihood of positives, and it just didn't really make sense. Also, there wasn't really a strong case for implementing upload filters on code collaboration platforms in general. Sort of the value gap of monetizing, infringing the copyright infringement doesn't hold for platforms like GitHub. So it did make sense. And so to kind of address this, we joined an advocacy group, got together with other platforms, but mainly developer advocacy orgs, and we were able to get an exemption specifically for code collaboration sites. So this is one approach we oftentimes take when it comes to policy. And then I would say a really, really big one, and this does relate to copyright, but I think the best example is security research, is the dual use applications of code. So again, functional purpose, it can do something. Sometimes a tool that can do something can also be used for malicious purposes. And so finding the balance between something that may perform harm, but also may perform a lot of neutral or useful tasks is something that we really have to think about all the time. So beneficial and harmful purposes. So the duality is really prevalent in security research, where code designed to identify vulnerabilities can also be exploited to create malware or execute cyber attacks. Similarly, techniques developed to bypass copyright protection for legitimate purposes, such as interoperability, accessibility, archiving, security testing, can be misused for piracy or unauthorized access. And so this is something that is very important on our platform. Obviously, GitHub is used to, share a lot of security research projects to identify bugs within open source code. And so it's something that we kind of wanted to clarify our stance on. So in 2021, we updated our policies on security research to provide clarification that we explicitly permit the sharing of legitimate and beneficial security research, but we disallow the use of our platform for active attacks that cause technical harm, such as malware campaigns or denial of service attacks. So that kind of means that we have a sort of a line where it's, something is, configured for attack being used in active harm, then it's not allowed on the platform. Obviously, this is, something that's very context dependent, and there are expectations. So we have expectations of transparency and responsibility between developers and the platform. Security research should be clearly labeled to prevent people from unintentionally downloading malware, and there should also be an appeals process for content removal if it was legitimate security research that was taken down, because that does happen. We do want to, reduce the use of our platform for malware and other attacks. So a recent kind of application of dual use that's not related to security research is our approach to deepfakes and synthetic media. So last April, we updated our policy approach to dual use software on synthetic media, and we clarified that we do not allow tools that are specifically designed for or encourage the creation of deepfake non-consensual intimate imagery or misinformation, but do support the sharing of legitimate research on these technologies. So again, what does that mean in context? Well, it means that platforms that were like deep nude were taken down, but platforms that were or projects that were just creating general like deep fakes were allowed. So we kind of had to create this balance, and obviously this is something where the appeals process is really important. Oftentimes we'll work with maintainers, so having clear labeling, having their intentions for their projects be more clearly stated. Also, like taking down specific components of content. So yeah, the dual use applications are something that's kind of challenging. It's also challenging to talk about with policymakers because, there's kind of the argument of, oh, if something could be used to do something bad, then shouldn't we take it away? But again, a lot of tools are neutral when they're not configured for attack. So yeah, it's definitely something that's very specific to code and its functional purpose. Another big one, obviously, is that code is something that is in use, and on platforms like GitHub, it's in use in lots of open source projects with downstream dependencies, and so that means that when we moderate code on our platform, we have to have careful deliberation of content and network effects. So the specificities of code as content, along with the interdependent nature of code collaboration, means that moderating a platform like GitHub requires technical understanding and careful consideration of context, dual use applications, and network effects of takedowns. Open source software is a public good. It's used as digital infrastructure and underpins a lot of our digital economy. And so moderating our platform requires a careful consideration of what impacts there will be from taking down code. And so a useful example from this is YouTube DL. Are any of you familiar with that project or the big takedown? Okay, cool. Just for background, I will say I had used YouTube DL before I worked at GitHub. It's a common one. It's a video archiving app. So it's a popular free software tool for downloading videos on YouTube, other hosting services. And so in 2020, we received a takedown notice from the RIAA, which is based in LA. Shout out, but we don't totally get along. But this takedown was saying that YouTube DL was in violation of the DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, Section 1201, which is specifically for not having tools that circumvent technological protection measures of copyrighted material. And so with that, it's it's a little bit in the weeds, but there are safe harbor protections from platforms, but there aren't protections specifically for 1201. So it was something that we took down immediately when we received the claim. But this is a really widely used tool, and because of that, it received a lot of backlash. And the community was like, hey, this is something that, again, has a lot of dual use applications, a lot of things that, are we really describing this as circumvention? I don't think I can explain very well like the argument with the rolling cipher, but like a lot of people are arguing that this didn't really constitute the level of a technological protection measure. And so with that, there's backlash, but there was also efforts from advocacy organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation to kind of explain the beneficial uses of the project, why they didn't believe that it was in violation of 1201. And so after we received that, we were able to, kind of feel comfortable bringing back the project and feeling like we could kind of stand behind that legally. And so, obviously there was a lot of legitimate uses for YouTube DL and things like that, but what it really made us think about was applying a level of technical and legal review to our process. So now we have both an engineer and a lawyer who reviews our 1201 takedown process, which is significant use of resources, but it does kind of, I think, both protect us in the name of safe harbor and then also avoid the misconsideration of context and network effects that can have really negative impacts. So yes, we overhauled our process, and this actually, I won't get into kind of the continuing legal battle with this, but this is a really interesting case that is still active. So if you are curious, I would recommend looking into it. It is very much still ongoing. All right, so that's kind of a conversation about what code as content means for how we moderate our platform and how that makes us different from other platforms. That said, I think the really notable part is that we have a very different community than a lot of other communities or a lot of other platforms. So the developer community is something that is very much established. It's GitHub, we consider ourselves a home of the developer community, but the developer community exists independently of GitHub as well. And so with that, we really want to serve the developer community, reflect its own norms and general norms of open source. So it really requires, I would say, like a multifaceted approach that upholds these unique norms and values and involve collaboration and transparency in how we moderate our platform itself. So an important aspect of embodying developer values is integrating feedback into our site policies. So basically, whenever we institute a significant change to our site policies, we have a 30-day notice and comment period, and that is when we kind of get feedback from people. So the most recent one was that deepfake policy update, and we did receive feedback. Kind of provide some clarification. Sometimes we change the policy, sometimes we kind of just explain to people our intentions with it so they can understand it better. And then we also, share our content moderation data on our Transparency Center and repository, and we have a robust repeals and reinstatement process. So, there are important reasons for GitHub to aim to keep as much code available as possible that complies within the law and our own terms of service and acceptable use policies. And so, with the goal of trying to keep as much code up as possible, we've developed a suite of content moderation approaches beyond takedown. So there's quite a bit that we do. We both can reduce visibility of something. We can add friction, so make it harder to find. This is particularly relevant when it comes to adult content because we want our platform to be generally available, but it's not entirely against our terms of service to have that content on the platform as long as it's related to software development. And so we kind of have those different approaches. We also, if there's users who are violating our terms, but they still have valuable code, we can keep their code up, but kind of kick them out. So there's a lot of different approaches. And I would say, one thing that's really notable is we do genuinely, work with maintainers and work with developers. Our appeals process is something that's reviewed by people. And it is challenging to consider how that will scale. We're seeing really, crazy growth on the platform, and with the advent of AI developer tools, it's only going to get bigger. So I think keeping those content moderation standards at scale is going to be a challenge, at scale. But yeah, definitely something that's really important. And so one of the big, I would say, the cornerstones of being able to scale a platform like GitHub is encouraging community content moderation. So it's really an important part, is empowering developers to take an active role in supporting the health of their own projects and communities. So I imagine quite a few of you are maintainers, so this is something that you probably experience quite a bit. So we encourage maintainers to set clear expectations for contributing to their projects. We also equip them with tools to moderate disruptive participation and share moderation responsibility with trusted collaborators. I will note, and this is kind of the elephant in the room, that a really bad growing problem on our platform is spam, and so that's something that we're actively considering within, our colleagues, is how to better equip maintainers to deal with the issue of spam, because it's quite significant. All right, yeah, and so we're definitely, open to feedback on this, and so I'll kind of get into how you can get in contact with us about anything related to policy. But before that, I'll give another case study that's kind of relevant to the needs and interests of developers, and how that comes into play with how we moderate our platform. Are any of you familiar with the XZ backdoor incident? This one was March 24. Okay, a couple of you. So I can't get into all the specifics. There's a Wikipedia page that's very well documented. Also on the repo itself, the maintainers provide a lot of documentation explaining what happened. So I encourage you to read that if you're curious. But essentially, so in March of 24, a engineer who was doing open source work, but through their job, it discovered a backdoor in the widely used XC compression library. And this is a really unique, strange, and unsettling backdoor incident, because it started in 2021. There was basically, we don't know exactly who or what entity was kind of planning this attack, but it started in 2021. A developer using a fictitious or likely fictitious name along with other aliases used social engineering to pressure the maintainer to make them a co-maintainer of the project, installed a backdoor into the project, and that allowed unauthorized access to systems using the compromised versions, posing a severe threat because XC was really widely used. And this is one where, I think there's a risk of not reflecting because it was stopped before it happened, but it's very likely that this could have been an incident worse than SolarWinds. So definitely something to think about, and it's really, I think, caused us to reflect on the importance of maintainers and avoiding burnout. So this was an interesting one. It's kind of complicated. So our trust and safety team was faced with the challenge of needing to act very quickly because this was very widely used. But we also wanted to, recognize that disabling a widely used project could create, additional friction for developers, cause a lot of issues, and also security researchers would want to see what happened and dive into the code so they can also address it. And so we initially blocked both of the maintainers' accounts because we didn't know who was doing or what was happening. But then once it became clear what was happening, we were able to reinstate the real maintainer, not the bad one, and then reinstate communication with him, and then also left him to decide if he wanted to reinstate the code, which he did. So we wanted to really respect his time and autonomy while also protecting people from active attack. So this incident underscored the vulnerability of critical open source projects to advanced threats. It also underscored the need for improved security practices within the open source community, the challenges of volunteer maintainers maintaining widely used open source projects that comprise critical digital infrastructure. So obviously security needs to be addressed, but the resourcing and sustainability is really the at heart of the issue. So moderation actions like those necessitated by the severity of this backdoor should be seen as an absolute last resort, as not something that we typically do. And so we're really trying to emphasize focusing on preventative solutions and supporting the health of our own open source ecosystem. So to that end, GitHub has its own funding instrument to support open source work. GitHub sponsors, and then we also recently announced the creation of the GitHub Secure Open Source Fund, which is very specifically linking resourcing and funding to security outcomes, which I highly encourage you to check it out. And then we also supported the launch of the Open Technology Fund's Free and Open Source Software Sustainability Fund in 2023, and then a really cool project organization to look into is the German Sovereign Tech Fund. So they have a actual government funded, imagine that, body that funds critical open source projects. So it's really cool to see that happening, and I think that the Sovereign Tech fund, maybe it's an agency at this point, but that can be kind of used as a model in thinking about how we can support critical digital infrastructure through funding. All right, so I think that this is obviously, open source AI is a huge topic of conversation at this conference, and it's definitely something that's influencing how we consider the sort of new frontiers for content moderation, new challenges. And so we kind of have a dual role at GitHub as both an AI tool provider and a model hub and hosting service. So people can use GitHub to make model components available to downstream developers, and then they also can use the tools GitHub provides to write software code with the help of AI. So as the AI developer community grows, platforms are going to have to consider risk mitigation strategies to address the challenges of being an intermediary for open foundation models. And this is really tricky because we want to encourage open sharing, and there's a lot of benefits to open source when it comes to AI and transparency. I think that the resourcing element and bringing more people in is really important, but also, like a lot of concerns as well. So adhering to our same reporting standards and our same content moderation approach will be a challenge, and so we do kind of expect that. And then another, I would say, I kind of mentioned this before, but the scaling question is a big thing with the advent of AI developer tools. So in a recent TED Talk, our CEO proclaimed that by 2030 there will be 1 billion developers on GitHub, which is really ambitious. I would love to see it. I hope it happens. We're currently at 150 million, but thinking about what it means for our developer community to grow from 150 million to 1 billion, really, I think it's like almost a fundamental transformation into what it means to be a developer. And so having both low code or no code software writing tools, just really lowering all these barriers to entry to being a software developer, and that is really going to change what it means to moderate GitHub. So obviously, just in a general scaling, resourcing, maintaining our moderation standards at scale will be a challenge, and then also AI does present concerns when it comes to security research and other malicious purposes. So that's definitely something that we're considering as well. So ultimately, our approach to content moderation is driven by the evolving needs of the developer community and various technologies that our platform is used to host. So it will continue to evolve to meet these new frontiers. All right. Okay. All right. So kind of closing off, but I'm going to kind of give you some information on if you're interested in participating in our site policies. So as I mentioned, we have a 30-day notice and comment period for substantive site policy changes. We also publish that on the blog, so if you follow the blog, you'll see that on social media as well. So we do kind of try to inform people that this is happening. And then you also can participate in our site policy repo and provide feedback via pull request or opening an issue. I'm a maintainer on the site policy repo, and it is really fun. A lot of people it's oftentimes suggestions for clarity, noticing typos, so if you want to participate in that, we encourage you to, get involved. We also have a developer policy repo that is more tied to the policy team itself. So in that, you can share public policy issues of concern with to developers, or just get in touch with us in general. And then, you can also email us at policy@github.com. And so with that, this QR code links to basically the paper that this talk is based off of. So the this is a more, I would say, like developer conference focused version of the paper that I co-authored with a colleague from our legal team and our trust and safety team, and it was published in the Journal of Online Trust and Safety. So if you would like to read it in full, go ahead. And yeah, it's definitely something that we're really interested in hearing from the developer community, from other platforms and how they're approaching this. And so yeah, I'll kind of leave it at that, open up to questions, and yeah, thank you so much for spending your late afternoon with me.
Round of applause for Margaret, everybody. Thank you. Okay, so any questions?
All right, well, no questions. I'll leave it at that. Oh, Cynthia, yeah? Ooh, yeah. So Cynthia, who's my coworker at GitHub, sorry, spoiler alert, but asked what is the kind of the challenge that surprised me the most. I definitely think I just the code as functional text is so interesting to me. It really is something that I think about all the time, and it's not something that policymakers really consider when it comes to copyright legislation. So I think the copyright fight is something that we have really focused on. But that said, like I don't want to sound too optimistic, but policymakers have been very open to that. So we have, worked on exemptions to the DMCA, specifically for security research. So it is something that, I think that people are open to hearing, but it is oftentimes something that's not considered initially, and we do have to have kind of like this advocacy effort to be like, hey, by the way, this could break software development and break code collaboration. So yeah, and this is really kind of, I think, a very long-term aspiration, but we really want to see developers in office, and so it's something that so Audrey Tang from Taiwan. There's quite a few developers in office in the EU, but less so in the States. So I think that's really something where obviously it's not as related to the content moderation, but having like a government that's led by people who are more technologically versed and also really excited about open source is something that like we really want to see for sure. All right. Any other questions? Not from a coworker? All right. Well, thank you all again, and yeah, have a good day. Thanks. Oh yes. Oh yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, so the question for the video recording is how we approach the people element of content moderation. So, kind of people having issues. And so I guess the big thing is the importance of maintainers, because we do use proactive moderation when it comes to child sexual abuse material and terrorist and violent extremist content. So we use photo DNA for that. So that content is oftentimes detected using tools. But otherwise, most things are reported by user reports. And so obviously, that's something where people can submit a ticket. But really, the most important part is having maintainers who are invested in their projects and kind of, setting up those expectations, dealing with disputes. So I think that's really something is we want to consider how we can, support maintainers to moderate their own projects and kind of take ownership, because like that really is the answer for a lot of these kind of issues. Awesome. Thank you.